Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Insurance Journal's Academy of Insurance's weekly webinar after show. I'm your host, George, and joining me for the after show today is the director of the Academy of Insurance, director of education for Wells Media Group, Patrick Raitt. Welcome, Patrick. And today's instructor. Today's class was Cannabis and the Homeowners Policy. And the instructor for today is Mike Koscielny. Mike, welcome to the after show. Great to have you here. This is your
Yeah,
second one, I believe.
thanks for having me. Yep.
Sure. So, Mike, when I was introducing you, I definitely was talking about the leadership aspects of your career, teaching it, living it, knowing it, everything, um, and some other, and the fact you're the president of Site, which is really cool. But also, I didn't hear a lot about cannabis in the bio for many good reasons, probably. One thing, but one question is, I mean, this class was really packed with really specific policy knowledge and theories like risk analysis. I mean, really lots of cogent and pungent information. What what makes you what inspires you to know so much about cannabis and policies and be able to teach about it so well? Because I wasn't getting that from your bio, but here we are talking about it.
Well, it's one of those stigma things. Do you want to admit to the fact that I would just say that I grew up in the 60s and I never inhaled, just for the record. So
All right.
it's interesting to me.
That's what draws you to know about cannabis and
Well,
teach it.
this thing, really what precipitated this whole thing was another fine organization, the insurance organization, actually came to me and said, "Would you do something on this subject? Because they're trying to create some 1 hour CE type opportunities for large agencies." And so they asked me, "Well, would you put something together on this subject?" And I don't know that it was precipitated by any prior arrests or detainments in my life, maybe, but uh, I am obliged them. I actually have done it for that organization a couple times, but that's really sort of what drove where I got today. It's an interesting subject. I think it really the challenge I think we face today is that there's so much focus on the commercial line side of things that people completely forget about the thing that affects virtually every one of us who owns a home, and that's we have that exposure on our homeowners, uh, particularly in states where it's legalized, and so that's really kind of I jumped on it for that very reason. I've been through a lot of webinars done by some really really smart insurance people about the commercial exposures. I thought we'd all be better served if we understood it from a personal perspective. So that's kind of what precipitated the whole thing, and it's been a lot of fun doing it. I sat on the ISO property panel for probably 20 years. This was a topic that came up right before I rolled off of that. So there was lots of conversation about it. I tell you, there was a lot of anxiety amongst some of the larger carriers about what this would mean in terms of homeowners insurance because of the silence in the policy. So I think that was a fun part too. I reached out to a lot of them on that, certainly to the ISO as well, to make sure that they were comfortable that I was taking snippets out of policies and that. It's a lot better experience when it's face to face and you're in a group setting because the conversation becomes, I think, more. The conversation sort of supports, I think, directionally where I tried to go with this, and that is it's an awareness thing that we need to understand because it could become a real problem for a lot of people, a lot of us, unknowingly, and that's a big challenge. And like I said early on in that conversation, when customers are sort of surprised by the policy doesn't provide some things, they immediately blame us, right? The carrier, the agent, whoever. They don't take the responsibility themselves. So part of that is making sure we help them along that path and do our best to at least educate the people that are educating them. And that's the tie back to sight. So it's all full circle. It's like the circle of life.
Wow, how poetic. The circle of life. I love it. Um, you talked a lot at the end, towards the end of the class, about risk analysis. And does the risk of writing cannabis get less risky as it gets more legal, and or it's less up to states, maybe the laws, than it would be if it was like a federal thing? Like what's or would risk just change, like the what what would prevent or not prevent somebody from being able to write cannabis?
Yeah, I think the fallback position always though is, well, if there is no state law, then the federal law takes precedent, right? Because there's a state law, then the states are protected. So the federal government could expand this much broader than, pick a state, I don't know, some place that doesn't want cannabis at all. Texas, as an example. I'm shocked that Texas has no, although they've tried in Texas to get it on the ballot. I think there is some medical marijuana, their movement for medical marijuana there, uh, but now it's forced on them. So I think what may happen is, as if the federal government, if the current administration says, well, it's now a class two narcotic, therefore it can be prescribed, it's going to force some of those 10 states that have done nothing about it to respond in some way, either to say, okay, fine, or no, no, we want to limit this down. We want to have these controls in place.
I had another quick question about the HO policies, like the homeowners policies, as it relates to this. You talked about a commercial cannabis business and how much you could get on a policy, like a deductible, maybe $3,000 if you have a commercial enterprise out of your home, and maybe 1,500 for transporting it or something like that. But the HO7, the HO6, the condo owner, or the HO7, the mobile homeowner, do they have less of a deductible because their residences are smaller, or do they have the same deductible because it's a dwelling in general?
I think it's more dictated by the marketplace. Florida, Patrick knows this. There's the standard deductible's high. Every home's got a hurricane deductible. There's been a real movement to higher deductibles, even on renters forms, right? The contents forms for people who rent apartments or homes instead of owning. Um,
The
it's more of a
HO4,
function.
correct?
It's more of a function of the economy, and I remember. I'm sad to say this. In 44 years, I remember the state of Wisconsin, when I first started in insurance, had a zero deductible policy. Which, think about it, that means everything was, as long as it was a covered peril, everything was paid for. Which now, but the economic times in the late 70s are very different than what they are today. So think about it. A loaf of bread was 19 cents when I first started working at a grocery store. Now, I don't know, what does it cost for a loaf of bread? I haven't bought one in so long, probably $3. I
Listen to
live with
Ross
a I live with
Ross
a woman
Perot
who's
here. How
I
much
live
this?
with a woman who's gluten free, so I'm gluten free too.
Oh, well, congratulations.
Thanks.
Are almonds gluten free? I know you have a passion
Yes,
for
yeah, they are the
fermented.
healthy food. Remember that. That's an important thing to keep in mind, George.
Yes, Mike, will do.
It's a good snack. Maybe
Thank
it
you.
sounds loudly when you chew them, but
No, it's very comforting, actually. I don't know why. Patrick, cannabis and the homeowners policy. What do you think of the topic in general? I guess more the how things affect the homeowners policy as opposed to cannabis. So the topic in general, Mike's class in particular, and what is your favorite kind of tree nut? I'm going Brazil here. Sorry to, I'm shucking.
wow.
So
Go big or go home, right?
this is one of those important topics that, like Mike said, our focus by and large has been on the commercial side. How are we going to ensure these dispensaries? How are we going to convince these legal business owners to trust the insurance industry with their insurance when uh, as this industry has grown over the years, it's been a very different person that gets into it today as opposed to 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And what fascinates me right now is this: what's going to happen when, not if, the federal government moves cannabis from a Schedule One drug to a Schedule Two or a Schedule Three drug, making it perfectly legal for physicians to prescribe. And then when you've got that tension, that continued tension between the state and federal governments, you really will begin to have some evolution in how these things go. That may be the one final pin, if you will, that causes everything else, all the other states to say fine, whatever, and legalize for medicinal use. There will still be those states that will not go the next step for adult use, or as they sometimes put it, rather than recreational. Um, and but there will no longer be they'll lose that kind of uh, piece that says, well, look, the feds still say you can't have this. Well, the feds are going to change that. And additionally, and I don't know that you mentioned it, Mike, but there is a move amongst states and within states to decriminalize to where even in a state where it is not legal at all, you have areas, counties, and cities that say, well, unless it's this amount or that amount, we're just not going to prosecute. We're not going to deal with that low level. Somebody's got some in their possession, not going to mess with it, and that will increase as well as we go, I believe.
What's your favorite nut?
Oh, hmm, uh, cashew.
Fun shape.
Yeah. And I think you raise an interesting point about uh, the whole aspect of even in those states where it's not legal, there
Mhm.
is areas within those states where the prosecutors are pretty relaxed on that, depending on the levels, right? I mean, you go
Yeah,
back 20 years ago, the war on drugs, if you had anything, you had seeds in the bottom in your pocket, that they found, you were prosecuted for that. Today,
yeah.
and it comes back to there's just a different cultural perspective, I guess,
Mhm.
on marijuana. Even though you read some of the things about how it's much more powerful than anything that was sold, in the 70s, 60s, and 70s.
Yeah,
So I think it's going to be an interesting challenge as we go forward with this, but it's not going away. This
yeah.
is
Oh, yeah.
something we're not going, we're not putting the toothpaste back in the tube. It's
No.
out, it's done. It's only going to spread even more. And like I said, if the federal government legalizes it for medicinal or even just for adult use, as you described, Patrick, it's going to force some states to do some things,
Absolutely.
right, that they may
Yeah,
not want, or they're going to stick to their guns, what they have. And I guess that, part of that, that's the beauty of our government, right?
absolutely. Yeah,
Right. It is
yeah,
truly governed by the people in this circumstance, right? And as long as the 10th Amendment stands, the states are safe. So,
yeah. And we have an excellent class that was done by Brenda Wells
yeah,
that
she's
talks
amazing.
about the history of this, going back to where there were where there the cannabis was listed in pharmaceutical literature 100 plus years ago,
Yeah.
and the evolution of this legality and some of the theories as to why it's illegal and things like that. So I would recommend that. And before we get too far afield, Mike, did you want to tell us about this little book?
It's an amazing book. I think I know who the author is. Um, yeah, it was sort of a labor of love. I don't know if I mentioned it before, but if you're going to write a book, don't tell anybody until it's about ready to be published. Because when you do, they'll ask you every time they see you how far you're along you were. I made the mistake 5 years ago saying I was going to write a book, and then for 5 years, everybody asked me, "Well, where's the book?" To the point where my wife's like, "Just sit down and write it, will you?" Good, don't. But it was actually a concept that was born while I was traveling for the CPCU Society, and I was in Iowa for their um, I-Day. They have an insurance day there, and I was a speaker as the president-elect. Actually, I wasn't even the president of the society at the time, but I had spent a whole day visiting insurance mecca, Iowa. There's so many carriers that are headquartered there. Met a lot of CEOs, had some great conversations. We had a beautiful dinner. in this restaurant that was on the top floor of a building. We're looking at the Capitol building. It was just surreal. And I got back to the hotel room, and I knew I was going to speak at a meeting that was going to happen in about 3 months. I was going to address the whole group at the lunch meeting for the CPCUs. And so I had to have something to talk about. And I was sitting there thinking about what I might say. And we were challenged with leadership and all that. And so this whole notion of lessons in leadership kind of uh, was spawned there. And I sat at the end of the bed with a pad of paper. I still had my jacket on. It was like 3 in the morning before I stopped. I don't know. Didn't take my jacket off, but I didn't. But I started just outlining what would this presentation be, and what it boiled down to was, as I thought about my experience as a leader, I found that there were a number of people that were my leaders that had a significant influence on sort of the leadership style that I have today. And it was this combination of what I felt were not necessarily the best, but things that really resonated. That when as they interacted with me in that manner, with that behavior, I felt so much more engaged with them. I wanted to do things for them. And so from that spawned these 13 behaviors, if you will, that were sort of instrumental to me. And they went back to, my Boy Scout leader, and my sixth grade teacher, and to the CEO of a company that I worked for 9, 10, 12 years ago, who had a really significant impact on me as well. Uh, so I tried to capture not just who they were, but the behaviors. So things like trust, being trusted, trustworthy, being. I talked about sort of this whole idea of engagement, this being accountable. My sixth grade teacher, God love her, Sister Mary Jane, she was about 5 feet tall and 5 feet around, a Dominican nun. They were brutal. This was back in the 60s, where in parochial schools they could beat you anytime they wanted to. Parents never sued, kids couldn't. Um, but she taught me some hard lessons about being accountable. But what she taught me was the rewards about being accountable. So taking the responsibility oftentimes gave me more cred, if you will, with her. And so after I learned the hard lesson, trying to listen to a World Series game with a transistor radio in my desk and the cord for the earpiece up through my shirt in my ear, in the only good ear I have, she caught me. And rather than deny it or blame somebody else, I just took the heat. But from that came a lot of opportunity. And I think that's the part of this. The one chapter I write about is the last person that I'd worked for in that. Not to say the other leaders weren't good, but he was a visionary. And I felt what I learned from him was you have to have a vision first, but more importantly, you have to communicate. You have to talk it. You have to live it. You have to walk it. And that's the way he was. I still have the laminated sheet of paper he gave me with the 10 things that he believed were the important things to success. It's in my folder. I have it sitting behind me in a drawer. Um, and I've referred to it oftentimes. And he would recite those in such a way every time we were all together, whether it was a meeting of 6 people or the entire office, 2,500 employees, he would talk about his vision to the point where it became your vision. And I thought that's a characteristic I want to learn. I want to observe how he does it, why, and more importantly, how he communicated it, because that's so much of the problem I think we face sometimes in leaders is that they may have a vision, but nobody knows, or they can't communicate it effectively, or they can't make it relatable to you, right? Why is what I want something you should want to? And I would tell you there was a lot of people like me who worked for this gentleman who would have gone through a wall for him, because if he said it was going to be good for us, we believed it. If it matched one of the 10 things, we were going to do it. So that's where it came from. I did the presentation, and then said, well, someone after the meeting said, in fact, it was Cindy Masters from Site. She said, you should write an article about that. And I thought, well, okay. I was busy. I never wrote the article. And then somebody said, well, you should write a book. So I started stopped, started, stopped, started, stopped. And then, last summer, I was pretty much sequestered to this office for a while. And my wife said, "You're not coming out till it's done." And I wrote it. And I think it's so matter of fact. I believe that your behaviors are a function of nurturing, not nature. You're not born with this. You may have some genes that suggest that you're tall. So a lot of times tall people are leaders. Don't tell Ross Perot that, because he was far from tall, but he was a great leader. Maybe not presidential, but his companies. So some of those things, but the other things are what you learn. The thing that I talk about in the book early on is that I have two kids. I worked a lot. I traveled a lot. There were some things in their lives I didn't see. I didn't see the growth, but I have three grandkids, and I get to see them regularly, and I see them develop. I watch how they behave. I watch them watch their parents, and then they sort of pick up on those traits from their parents. Some of the people in the book that are were the greatest influence to me were my father and my grandfather, his father. He lived with us. My dad's father lived with us, and he was an immigrant. He came to the U.S. as a young kid. He was 10 years old to live with an aunt. His parents were killed during the Russian Revolution. He he was a tradesperson he was a cabinet maker, and then he was a tool and die worker till he died. And but he understood. What I learned from him was persistence. And one thing that he did early in my life, and I never recognized the value of that, was that he used to read to me in broken English. It was sort of fun. Um, but he read to me, one of the first books I ever remember him reading was The Little Engine That Could. And it so resonated with me later in life, not then, but later in life, when one of the other leaders that I reference in my book read it in front of 500 sales, underwriting, claims, and operations managers at a conference. He sat on the stage in a wingback chair and read the book and held it up so we could see the pictures like we were in the first grade. Um, and people in the audience were crying, not laughing. They were crying because they recognized, because of this individual and how authentic he was, what he was trying to say is that it only takes one person oftentimes to make a difference, but yeah, be persistent. And while I was listening to him read that, all I could think about was my grandpa Albert. So those are the things I think I that's nurture. Um, I would tell you that what I say in the book is that here's the behavior, this is how I experienced it, to sort of tell the story, so that if you haven't experienced it, hopefully you can experience it through my eyes and my writing. But more importantly, at the end of each chapter, I have a call to action. I say, here are things you can do. If you do these 10 things, or 5 things, or 7 things, you do it regularly. I believe if you do anything for 90 days, it becomes a habit. And habits are hard to break. So if you do this and you do it in a way that's meaningful for you and authentic, that behavior can be part of what you are. That you're not just cast in stone and you can't be changed. I can tell you, it changed through my career and the people I work for. I absorbed a lot of those experiences, and I think it always made me a better leader. I really believe it. I continue to evolve as a leader because of those people that I was consciously watching to say. So that's the impetus of the book. I talk a lot about it to young people. I got shelves full of leadership books. I've read so many of them. And I walk away with those oftentimes with, well, that was fun. Or, there's Sir Alex Ferguson, who was the manager of Manchester United soccer. I read his leadership book. It was great. But I thought, I never walked away from there with anything that said, okay, do these things. I picked up some things from that I might have tweaked how I view things or directionally how I was going. But I tried to make the book something that it could be a playbook. That if you believe these things are important, and there are some very fundamental ones, and then there are ones that sort of build, and then there are sort of the advanced views of things. But if you believe in a playbook, which I do, you have to have a plan, then this is a way that you can transform yourself. or if not transform, enhance your abilities as a great leader. So that was the book.
Mike, thanks. And we'll also, just as a sneak preview, June 27th, you'll be back with us
Yep.
and the class will be Born to Lead. So you'll be able to expand more about the book in the class,
Yeah.
ideally.
It's a presentation I've probably done 50 times. I'm going to clean. It's been a while since I've done it, so I'm going to sort of enhance it a little bit. But it's one where I think it's a sneak preview to what the book is. That's kind of what I'm thinking about relative to that.
I'm looking forward to your class, The 7 Habits of Highly Successful Literarily Sequestered Tree Nut Eaters. That's the one I want.
Yeah, sequestered by force.
Well, sequestered, yeah, it doesn't necessarily suggest a voluntary
Yeah.
state of being. Mike, thanks. Thanks. It's a great urge everybody. If you're a member, check out the class as soon as it's configured for on demand, Cannabis and the Homeowners Policy. If you're not yet a member, join the academy and access great courses like this. I know a guy, and we can get you hooked up. We can get you started. Mike Koscielny, thank you so much for all of your inspiration, all your knowledge. Really, really appreciate it. Your warmth, your humor. Thank you. We'll
Thank
see
you.
you in June.
Good.
Patrick, thanks for coming to the after show. You're probably just strolling on by and the door was open and you came in. So thank you for attending, gracing us with
Always
your
best part of my week.
Hey,
fantastic.
George and Patrick, thank you very much for the opportunity to. Big fan of what you guys are doing.
Mike, thanks so much. We're a fan of yours. On behalf of Patrick and Mike, this is your host, George, saying thanks everyone for coming to the after show. We'll see you next time. Have a great day, everybody.